Hello,
Yellow.
how you doing?
I'm doing all right. We'll be getting started very shortly and letting everybody get in.
Sounds good.
All right. Can you all hear me? Yes or no? Thumbs up. All right. I see a few thumbs up. I see it in the chat room. Throw it in the chat room if you can hear me loud and clear. Get some lighting going on here. Yep. Gabriella said, yeah. A few people said yes. All right. So we're going to get things started. We're going to jump right into our conversation here. And if this is the first time we've met, we'll definitely get a slide in there to give you some more details about me. But today's conversation is going to be focusing on live coding interview with me, Bobby D, Bobby Dorless, Bobby D, my friends call me that. But in general, we have a video recording that we're going to review where I had a guest come in and kind of do a mock interview. And we might actually be looking for some participation and some support through today. But let's quickly just have a quick chat about who I am. So my name is Bobby Dorless, and I'm one of the technical career coaches here at CodePath. I'm primarily focusing on technical interviewing and getting you all ready for a fruitful career in technology and engineering. I've been in the field for a while. I go back 20 plus years to almost about 2002. My journey is very unique because I don't have a college degree. I decided to do 2-year technical school certifications and just leveled up. I worked for a really cool social media company that's actually been in the news as of late. It's the one with the little blue bird, but I should say the one that used to be the little blue bird. I actually spent at least close to a decade there working as a staff engineer or becoming a staff engineer and working on hyperscale distributed computing systems. So if you're interested in those type of conversations, definitely come and holler at me. Now, in terms of it as an engineer, software engineer, my skill sets revolve around Python, which is my most proficient programming language, Golang, which is a very similar language in terms of phonic, definitely a lot of syntax still, but it's a more compiled language, so it's for more lower latency type programming. And then if you didn't know, if you're ever at a terminal and you're running Bash, Bash itself is a programming language. That's by far is probably one of the first programming languages I've learned and definitely something that I'm extremely proficient at. We're going to just jump right into the conversation here. But before that, I want to talk to you all about some of the services we have here at the Career Center. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I believe the link is ghost.codepath.org/career center. But in general, we offer mentorship, virtual career labs, which we have coming up on virtual career fair, which we have coming up in October. It is basically going to be focused on getting you all direct connections to employees. It's called EES. If you haven't seen an email about it, hit me up afterwards, but I hope all of you attend. We also have some resource guides, internship opportunities, tech fellows. I'm not sure if we have any tech fellows in the room today, but more or less, it's definitely an opportunity for you to continue to develop your skills by supporting us here at CodePath. And then the last one I would say is networking event that also falls into that EES conference that we have coming up in October. One thing that I also want to mention is that I am looking for a volunteer. I promise you it will not be that difficult in our conversation. I'm looking for someone that's proficient in Python so we can have a conversation about some code later on. But in general, when the opportunity presents itself, throw your name inside of the chat room if you're looking to volunteer. I see one hand already up, and definitely looking forward to these conversations. But yep, we'll definitely bring you up on stage so that you can be my volunteer, the one that's raising your hand. So I'll definitely come say what's up. There's 2 or 3 volunteers. All right. So the thing about our conversation today is about technical interviewing. I pulled this slide up for you all to kind of really get calibrated in the technical interviewing process. And actually, before I even continue, throw inside the chat room how many technical interviews you've actually been through. If you haven't been in any technical interviews, just throw 0. If you have, tell me the numbers of how many technical interviews you've been in. All right, this looks like there's a few zeros, which is okay. Someone has at least 2 technical interviews. A few people have 1. One person has at least 5 plus. And in general, I'm more or less providing you with kind of like a behind the scene conversation about technical interviewing. And one of the things that I want you to all be mindful of, OAs, yes, OAs are definitely a new way that companies are evaluating candidates outside of just, doing a code pairing exercise. But all of these type of interviews or these engagements are really meant for us to evaluate your skill set and see where your proficiency is. Now, technical interviewing, and at least the coding interview section, which we're going to focus on today, really does have some foundational things that you have to put in place every time you interview. And the reason why I bring this slide up here is that I want you to also know that when you are doing a technical interview, one of the first things you should not be doing is jumping into writing code. I've interviewed hundreds of candidates before, and that's probably one of the main feedbacks that I always want to make sure I open up the gate with, is just know that when you're being evaluated, the first intentions should not be writing code, but really thinking about different ways of solving the problem or coming up with a solution. So when I'm thinking about my first steps in coding or participating in a coding exercise, I usually always have to think about how am I going to solve this problem, articulating that in some type of form. I've seen 2 ways work very well during interviews. Obviously, auditing, like verbalizing your thoughts and talking out loud, because communication is very key. And if you're one of those that don't like to talk out loud or can't really get their thoughts out that way, I've seen candidates be very effective using commenting. Every programming language has a comment. If you put a hashtag or a pound in front of whatever you're saying in Python, you can basically write just about anything. And the key thing here is that I want you all to make sure that you're practicing this and ultimately taking the time to analyze your problems, especially during a coding interview. Now, in general, coding interviews discussions usually consist of 2 people, either the interviewer and the candidate. And the interviewer usually asks a question. So I've seen that there's a few people that had 0 as how many times they've done technical interviews. So I'm trying to more or less just give you insights into what that situation looks like. So I'll step back just a little bit. So technical interviews usually consist of either 2 or 3 parts. The first part, which I've seen someone mention, is an online assessment. Recruiters like to send online assessments so that they can more or less arrange a list of candidates that they would like to move forward with. The thing that I want you to remember about online assessments are 2 things. Number 1, stay within the time frame that they define. And then number 2, get code complete. Code complete means that you are passing all the unit tests that the exercise is asking you to write some code for. The reason why I have to emphasize this is because I've had cohorts come into one-on-one conversation with me and say, yo, I did this online assessment. I answered question number 1, but I didn't answer question number 2, and they didn't call me back. I'm like, hey, you have to make sure that you're completing all the code and all the exercise when you submit it. And if not, just know that there may not be somebody on the other end looking at your code, but it could be more or less them sorting a list and saying, hey, who at the top of the list finished all the code? All right, those 10 candidates, we're going to move forward with them. So just make sure that that's your line in terms of what you need to submit for you to feel comfortable that you'll move on to the next round. There may be scenarios that you are able to get through if you only do half or one of the problems, but in most cases, they're looking for code complete, meaning that the code that's submitted passes all the tests and able to showcase your proficiency. Now, the second type of technical interview you'll go to is the one that we're talking about today, which is, a code pairing exercise or code pairing interview. This is where you will be interviewing with an engineer like myself, where we would ask you a question, either lead code style, algorithm style, or real world type questions, which are the ones that I like to ask. And our goal in the conversation is to more or less have you talk about the problem, like I was talking about earlier in terms of developing a solution, but also generating code that can be submitted and or at the proficient level that they're looking for. These coding exercises can be stressful because somebody's looking over your shoulder, watching you work, but this is how we evaluate you and your skill set. The things I want you to be mindful of is making sure that you're coding in a coding language you're most proficient with, and definitely feeling confident in your ability to code. Now, one of the strategies that I like to make sure that I emphasize during these coding interviews that you hopefully have learned here at CodePath, and if not, I will drop a link in here. And that strategy is called umpire. Raise your hand or actually put a +1 in the chat room if you've ever heard of this strategy here called umpire. Yeah, majority of you should. +1, big ups to that. And I'll drop the link in here just for those that may have not. It's a GitHub link to where CodePath stores some of their documentation in general. But remember, the process of using the umpire strategy is very important for you to maintain that consistent way of you answering these questions or solving these problems. I started off the conversation like, hey, don't jump into the writing code. And I had to kind of slow down a little bit because I want to make sure that you understand the reason why I say this. And the umpire strategy is there for you to do that. It's actually there to force you to document your thoughts, making sure that you understand the problem, doing some type of pattern matching from problems you solved in the past, creating a plan, potentially writing pseudocode, implementing the code, basically taking pseudocode and bringing it into actual real code, reviewing it, and then evaluating and more or less just notating what type of big old notation it is, and or evaluating if you can make better iterations of the code itself. So if you're not practicing the umpire strategy on every time you're doing some type of coding exercise, I encourage you to, because the other thing that this does is once you have this type of strategy, it creates a habit. Now, this habit itself is going to make you comfortable. It's going to make those times when you get really anxiety or you're really scared per se, it's going to bring that down because you're going to be following the same pattern over and over. All right. But the umpire strategy is definitely a great resource. And if you're not, comfortable doing the whole umpire strategy, just make sure that documenting which the requirements are and then communicating with the interviewer is going to be essential for you to be able to showcase your skill set. And sometimes it's one of those things that happen in interviews I've conducted that because I was able to hear the conversation that the candidate was talking about and what plans they were thinking about doing, they may have not solved the problem correctly, but I've seen the skill sets that we were looking for a position. And I'll tell you right now, I've hired people that has bombed the coding exercise, but because they communicated effectively and I heard their thoughts, I was able to make an effective evaluation. So that's why communication is something I want to make sure I emphasize. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to have a listen to an interview that I conducted with an individual that has really been impactful to our industry. His name is Anthony DeMays. If you haven't heard about Anthony DeMays, definitely look him up online, follow along because he's definitely changing the game in terms of what it looks like to be an engineer, but also teaching skills around being an effective engineer. And one of these conversations we had was here at CodePath, where we more or less were talking about demystifying the technical interviewing process. And I want to replay this recording of me, conducting a mock interview with Anthony. And the key thing I want you all to listen for is how does he kind of build up his solution in terms of his communication, and definitely observe his mannerism and how he is in terms of being able to interact with me as the interviewer. So let's sit back and take a listen and hear what Anthony. So the next slide that we have is, Anthony, it's that time, bro. We're going to do some practicing here. Okay. Anthony and I are going to, or actually Anthony is going to be interviewing for a position. I'm going to flip the mode real quick and do a mock interview with Anthony. And he's going to help us understand kind of the first beginning of answering a problem or a coding challenge, how you, analyze and research, not research, but analyze the solution before you actually start to write code. You ready for it, Anthony?
As ready as I'm going to be. Stay ready, so I ain't got to get ready.
So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm just going to pop into the screen here. And let's just go ahead and switch into mode. And we shouldn't take no more than 5 minutes, whoever's sitting around listening in. All right. So thank you so much, Anthony, for coming in and interviewing at XYZ company for a software engineering position. Today, we're going to be talking about solving an algorithm problem. But before that, give me a quick introduction of yourself and tell me what coding language you're most proficient at.
Hey there. So I'm a software engineer of 20 years, spent 8 years at Google. I specialize on the front end, including TypeScript, React, Node.js, stuff like that. Yeah, and I just really like to solve problems using front end. So excited to be here. I would love it if we could interview in TypeScript, JavaScript, something like that.
Awesome, awesome. And thank you very much for letting me know where your proficiency at and what coding language you want for us to talk about. Now, our problem that we're going to be solving today, and let me bring up this screen here. If I could quickly find it. There we go. Let me know when you see that screen pop up.
I see it. I see
Awesome.
let's practice in the thing. Okay, cool.
Awesome. So today's problem that we're going to solve and review is a challenge that we're having in our environment, defining strings that are anagrams. Strings are integers, and more specifically, a grouping of words or numbers. And what we want to do is, based on the description of what an anagram is being able to find words that have the same length, same characters, but if you reorder them, they can spell different things. If you can see down there, the example of heart can be reordered into earth. But the thing that I want us to cover before we actually start to write code is how would you kind of come up with an ideal solution to be able to solve such a problem?
All right, cool. So just so I can understand and break this down, you want me to test to see whether two strings are anagrams of each other?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Good. So then whatever solution I write, it just needs to return. I assume it's going to take like two strings, and then I'd need to return true or false if they're anagrams of each other.
Awesome. Well, thank you for asking for some more clarity in the question. What we're actually going to do is pass in a string of words, and what we're going to do is group the words that are actually anagrams of themselves.
Oh, okay. So we're going to take like a stream of words, like say, 51 words or something like that, and then we're gonna group all the words so that all the anagrams are grouped. All the anagrams of a specific word are grouped together. So, like in this example, if I had heart, earth, and like flip, I would have two groups. One group that has heart and earth, and then the other that has flip. Do I have that right?
Yep, that sounds perfect.
Okay, dope. All right. So then, is there a limit to how many of these things I'm going to get? Am I always going to get one? Is it possible that I won't get any strings at all?
Yeah, so you might actually end up getting an empty list, or a list. The length is longest list will be 50 items in that list.
Okay, all right. So I can get between 0 and 50 items in the list. Okay, dope. I understand that. So then, at the least, I might return 0 groups, or I might return 50 groups. Does that sound accurate?
That sounds accurate.
Okay, cool. And then do I need to check whether these words are valid or not?
No, we don't need to validate if they're actually real words.
Okay, so hold on. I just need to type some notes in here. We'll receive between 0 to 50 strings. And the strings can contain numbers, right?
Correct.
Okay. Strings may not be dictionary words and may contain letters or numbers. Do I need to worry about like special characters or any weird rules around that?
Nope.
Okay. And then need to return items grouped. All right, cool. So I assume that I'm getting an array of values, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then in what format should I return this? Intuitively in my mind, I think that returning a dictionary of arrays makes sense, where the key is like, the words that are like some kind of key that groups everything, and then an array of all the values that fit. Or do I need to return like an array of arrays?
We're going to eventually return array of arrays, but I like the way that you're thinking in terms of keys with array values.
Okay, no, I mean array of arrays is perfect. And does that resulting array need to be sorted some kind of a way? Like, do I need to return everything in order of appearance, or does it?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, so I can just group it whichever way. Okay, so return array of arrays. Okay, excellent. I think I have enough. Is it possible to get empty strings?
Is it possible to get empty strings? No, there won't be empty strings. It would be the empty list or no, it won't have empty strings.
Okay, so each string will have at least one character that I can use for grouping. Okay, cool. So here's, if you don't mind, I'd like to, I would love to run through some examples, if that's fine. We did talk about one with heart, earth, and J, and I think we also talked about if I get an empty list, I should return empty array. So just going back to the heart, earth, and like jazz example.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get, I'm kind of doing it this way. What I should return is heart, earth is going to be in one. This is going to be in the chat, by the way. And then jazz is going to be the other thing. So that would be a valid input and output.
Roger that.
Okay, fantastic. And then if I get this, and if I get an empty array, I'm just going to return empty. Okay, cool. So I think I know how I would want to do this. Essentially, what I want to do is, so the first solution that comes to mind is take each word that comes in to my list. I'm going to sort it by letter and by value. So we'll use just a simple ASCII sort. Is ASCII fine, or is this like?
That's perfect.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to take each word, I'm going to sort it in character order. And then I'm going to use a dictionary to start building a grouping of similar words. So when I find something in the dictionary or in my hash map, I'm going to add to that array in the value. And then what I would do is read those values back out of the dictionary to make my array of arrays.
Ooh, thank you so much, Anthony D. Mays. Let's give Anthony D. Mays a round of applause here. Give him one and throw it in the chat with the round of applause, because he even pulled another slip when he put his notes in the chat room, so y'all know how he thinks. Truly, truly, truly. Oh, so much. I wish I had those notes, and I actually have to go back and look at this video so I can make sure I include the notes next time around. But the key thing that I want us to continue our conversation around is telling me the things that you felt Anthony D. Mays did very well. So in the chat room, go ahead and type in there, what do you feel Anthony D. Mays did very well in our initial conversation? And remember, this is before he even started to write code. Anybody has any feedback on what he did well? Clarifying questions and running through examples. Great example, right? When I think about clarifying questions, as I was talking, I was waiting for him to kind of ask for more questions, ask for, hey, is it going to be this type of string? Are there going to be numbers in the string? Are there going to be an empty string? Is the array going to be empty? These clarifying questions are extremely important for you to really think about before you start to write code. Because imagine if you don't get clarity on those questions and then you're writing code to take into consideration special cases and things like that, you're wasting your time, right? So clarifying code was extremely well. Another one was running through examples, right? I do apologize that I didn't have his output, and he actually pulled that on me, and I didn't even know he was going to do it because we had a separate doc, but he put it in the chat room for all those that attended so that they could see. But the cool thing that he did was he was writing down, hey, this is the scenario. If I get a string or an array, if I get an array or a list with strings in them, what do I do with them? And then actually writing them in terms of like pseudocode. Now we'll kind of more label it as pseudo output code so that we could kind of talk about what it potentially could look like. Yeah, that was definitely noteworthy. Process of working through the problem, very clear, clarifying questions, understanding the problem, and asking a lot of good clarifying questions. I love hearing this because this is a great example of what you'll need to do during the conversation with your interview is to make sure that you're making it a conversation. If you notice, even when we first started off, right, I was like, hey, I'm here to talk to you about this position. Tell me a little bit about yourself, right? Is making sure that you're feeling like you're having a conversation rather than being interrogated, because you're not being interrogated. It's an open conversation that we're having, and I'm trying to measure your performance and then giving you, a +1 or moving things forward, right? So thank you all for giving some great context about the things that he did very well. Edge cases is another one that I see that pop up. Now, edge cases are really cool. Edge cases are things that you should be thinking about in terms of, hey, what are invalid inputs that you can provide? Like, it's like, Should I be writing code that says, hey, that I should be at least receiving some type of array or list? And if I don't, then what those conditional code would look like? Or edge cases as like, hey, how much input will I receive? Will it be thousands of lines, hundreds of lines, or is just 2 lines, right? In general, those edge cases are things that you want to articulate, mention out loud, and then getting clarifying questions about those edge cases, all right? So thank you all for your comments there. And let me see if I can move on.
So the next slide that we have is,
Whoa, sorry, wrong button. This is an opportunity for us to get a volunteer. Now, I know somebody raised their hand for volunteering. I see that we do have one more person. There are 2 people. So there are 2 names inside our Zoom right now that have both of their hands raised. And I need one person to help me make a choice. All right, there's 3 people. Let me see. The last person that made a comment was David. David, Huang. David, go ahead and write in the name of which of the 2 people you want us to have go through mock interview. You wrote down your comment and he did an extraordinary job of breaking down the problem and then utilizing certain data structures, so on and so forth. Can you give me a name of who you want us to run through this exercise? All right, David, we're going to have a countdown. Let's see. I don't see David's comments.
Desire.
All right, Desire, it looks like you are the one that's coming up. Hey, good afternoon. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
All right. I do want to say thank you to everybody else that raised their hand and volunteered. David, thank you very much for picking Desire. It seemed like you were definitely one of the first ones to raise your hand. And we are basically going to do an exercise here. So one of the things that I like to do during interviews is evaluating engineers' ability to read code. So it's not only about writing code that you'll encounter during interviews, but also about reading code and giving me your opinion about, you know, the code that we have in front of us. All right. So we're going to be looking at the solution to the problem that Anthony DeMays was presented. Anthony DeMays' problem that he was presented was talking about anagrams. Now, anagrams is a way for you to be able to compare words and see if the words themselves, if they're reordered, if they can be the same word. He definitely gave us the type of solution he was implementing with some sorting algorithm, using a dictionary to kind of store the values, and then ultimately taking advantage of those stored values as a dictionary and then returning those values. But we're going to be reading through some code. So I want to more or less give you a chance to kind of help me solve this problem that we have with this code base. My first question is, have you seen this before?
No, I haven't actually.
Perfect. That's even better. So tell me what's happening in line number 1. We're going to read through it. What's happening in line number 1?
Okay, so line number 1, as far as I understand, has an array of strings. They're all dictionary words. I see some duplicate words as well. So it's just basically it's an array of strings, and its variable is check words. So it's an array of string assigned to a variable called check words in all caps.
Perfect. So I do have a trivia question for you. I see check words is capitalized. What does that mean?
If check words is I do know at a higher level, capitalized letters are different from letters that are non-capitalized, and has something to do with the odd values, basically, like, because usually I see what you mean. So yeah, usually when you're using capitalized variables in it kind of like a global name, it used to refer to like a global variable per se. If you don't use the word global, because I think there's a keyword in Python called global. So if you don't declare the keyword global, you could also use like all caps to specify that. Okay, yeah. Yeah,
for sure. So while you're reading through the code, you kind of know that that's going to be at the top of your code, and it's definitely kind of like global. The next thing I want to ask you is line number 3. How many arguments are we taking in?
We're taking in 1 argument, so the array in our function.
And then line number 4, what type of data structure is that?
I believe that's a dictionary. It's called a dictionary in Python. I think, yes, that's a dictionary. Yes, you can tell you could tell from the curly brackets that that's a dictionary.
For sure, for sure. And tell me something cool about dictionaries.
So a dictionary is one of it's a really unique data structure in Python that like accesses elements based on their contents as opposed to their indices. Like for instance, if you have a list, if you want to access an element, you just get its index if it's like a regular array list. But in a dictionary, access of elements are done through content in the sense that you have a key which holds a value. So you can think of it as like an actual dictionary in real life, right? If you want to get the meaning of a word, for instance, the key is the word itself and the value is the meaning of that word. And so that's kind of like one way I like to think about dictionaries. So dictionaries are like useful for like accessing data based on contents. They're really good for like lookup because they have a runtime complexity of it's a constant runtime complexity to look up values, which is why they're really good to like if you're trying to like look up items because it's a constant runtime to do that.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about line number 7. So line number 6 says that we're going to be iterating through the array and we're looking for, or we're going to assign a variable called word. And then line number 7 is doing something with that word. Can you explain to me what's going on line number 7?
Okay, so line number 7 has it has the dot join method. And what dot join basically does is it's kind of like because usually at a higher level, if you say there are two like when I'm talking about dot join, I like to explain it with its counterpart, which is split, right? So like while if you're familiar with the Python library for strings, when you call the split method on a word, like on words separated by some separator, it splits those words based off of your separator and turns them into a list. And if you call the dot join with that separator, it joins the words. And so what I think what's going on here is that we're iterating through our array, and when we get a word, we're iterating through our array, and the word is just basically because I think I'm kind of what exactly is word in our code, because I see a reference to, because like what is like sorry just so back
Word.
so word is so our array is a list of words, right? And each word, okay, so we're iterating through our array, so each word, and so why why exactly are we, so what does sorting the word itself do? Because the word itself is a string, and the sorted function, based on my understanding, takes a collection. Like for instance, you want to sort a list. And so what does sorting the word actually do?
Yeah, so sorted will actually return the word in ordered list. That's actually what it does. And actually, I should have probably left that as a trivia question in there. And somebody could, throw in there some examples of what sorted would do to a word. But you are right in terms of what join is. So let's imagine that sorted does something to the word, and then join allows us to add them back together.
Yeah, it re-adds them back together into like a single string, and then you would now add it to your variable, which is sorted a word.
For sure, for sure. So now that we know that we have a sorted word, right? So the next line number 8, explain that to me, what we're doing there.
Okay, so what line number 8 does is we're basically checking for membership, right? So like the in operator is a keyword that checks for membership, and line number 8 is basically it's a conditional statements, and so we're basically checking if our sorted word is a key in our dictionary, right? So if our sorted word is in our dictionary, then we would then move on to line number 9, because how if statements work is that if the condition that the if statement is checking for is true, then it goes into the indented portion. And so if our condition, which is checking if our sorted word is in our word dictionary that we've created in line 4, if that's the case, mind you, the in operator checks if the word is a key actually. So if our sorted word is a key in our word dictionary, we would then move on to line number 9. And would you like me to say what line number 9 does as well?
Yeah, tell me what line number 9 and 10 is doing for us.
Okay.
If you can tell us that.
Okay. So line number 9 basically calls the .get method. So the dictionary.get method. So like the .get method is a really cool method in terms of working with dictionaries. And what it does is when you pass into .get, it expects a key, which in this case is a sorted word. Remember that we checked to see that sorted word was a key first before moving on. If our sorted word is not a key, we would get an error. And so it would actually, we will not actually be, no, I think it will get, no, not error, we get none. I think it will return none. If our sorted word is not a key, it will return none. So to avoid that, that's the reason why the check in line 8 was put in place. And so line 9 basically gets so line 9 basically then goes to the sorted word key in our dictionary and checks if our word that we're at, because remember, like, this is a loop, and so at every instance of a loop, we're at a word, and so it checks if the word that we're at is amongst the values of the sorted word key, if that makes sense. So let's say, for instance, our sorted word has, I guess, our sorted word has ACR, for instance. Our sorted word is ACR, and amongst ACR, you could, I'm thinking ACR to be like the first instance. So let's say, for instance, our sorted word has ACR, that's our key, and amongst ACR, we have the word car as a value in ACR, right? So let's say we're iterating through our array, and car is our word that we're currently at, right? And so it basically then checks if that word, which is car, is amongst your values of ACR, which based on my example, it does. It's so basically it checks if the word that we're at our iteration is amongst the values of our key, which is sorted word. And if that's the case, then it moves on to the continue. And what continue does is continue basically skips the rest of the iteration and moves on to the next instance, right? Now, if it happens to be that our word is not a value amongst our sorted words, right, we would then go on to line 11. The continue statement wouldn't get executed, right? Because we would then, so we'll go on to line 11 and actually assign, so like basically, we would then get to line 11. So what line 11 does is, line 11 basically does, because when you do word, when you put in a dictionary and use the subscript operator, right? The subscript operator expects a key, which in this case is a sorted word, right? And our key sorted word, so it gets it. And then, so when you do the word dict and your subscript and sorted word, that's the value, right?
Sure.
Sorted word, yes. And so then, so word dict or sorted word, and then the append. And so we add or based on my understanding, it seems like the values is a list of words, because when you do word dict of sorted word, the value is a list, because that's what you can call the append method. Okay, yeah, so word dict subscript sorted words gets you a list of words, and then you append our current word to that, open up sorted word to that list. And it makes sense now why we are checking for membership in line 9 again, because word dict.get a sorted word, it gives you a list of values. So yeah, and so that's
you're hitting the nail right on the head. You're hitting the nail right on the head. Now, one thing I do want to ask you is, you mentioned something at line number 7, that if we try to query a dictionary by explicitly defining the index and the string of the dictionary, rather than using a get, what type of error would you get if that key does not exist?
The key is you get a key error. You get a key error, and then, because I think basically you have a key error, and then I think you have a small explanation that says key not in, and then your dictionary name. I think, yes, yeah, you get a key error.
For sure. All right, so let's move on to line number 15. What does line number 15 do?
So line number 15, basically, so dictionary.values is a really so what line number 15 does is, so first of all, we have a return statement there, and the return statement is what you use to exit a function, right? So whenever you're in a function, when it hits a return statement, it exits the function and like it gives it the value that you ask it to give you and exits the function. So in this case, we're telling it after we're done iterating through our words in the array, after we're done doing everything from line 6 to 13 for every instance of the words in our array, we'll return our values of our word dictionary. And what that does is it basically, because word dictionary has, there is no such thing as word underscore dicts. I think we might have a problem with line 13 because I don't see any reference to that variable.
Wow, look at you already debugging code before I even ask you if there's a problem with the code. How many other people take one pause? How many other people saw that there was a bug in the code? And if they do know what the bug is, put a +1 inside the chat room. And then I'll have Desire explain it one more time. All right, I see a few people definitely caught that bug. All right, so go ahead and explain line number 13. What's going on line number 13?
Okay, so line number 13, basically, so line number 13, we're basically saying if our if statement at line number 8 fails, which is the fact that our sorted word is not a key in our word dictionary, we would then create a new key, right? We'll create a new key and reassign this value to be our list with the word in it. But the problem is that the dictionary word underscore dict does not actually exist in our function. And so if we try to run this, if our if statement fails, Python would throw an error. I believe it's going to be a name error. So it will tell you name error, and it might even suggest, did you mean word or something? I don't know, but sometimes it's just suggestions. But I believe we get a name error if we try to run this because the name word underscore dict is not defined.
100%, 100%. Now, let me ask you this. Now, this is kind of theory that I want to talk to you about. Is this code base, after we fix that problem, which line number 13 is definitely a bug, and we actually changed the word from WOR to WORD underscore dict, that should solve the problem. What would you do else in this code base to make it production ready?
Oh, I'm sorry, you said, so after fixing the
bug.
Okay, sorry, could you?
What else would you do to the code base to make it production ready?
Okay, in terms of what exactly? By production ready. Okay, I guess you could perhaps, because also it depends on the target audience, right? Because if it's a if our target audience is a Python, like if a target audience are primarily proficient in Python, then you would assume that they would know what this code does. However, that isn't often the case, right? And so we might be working with a bunch of Java or JavaScript engineers who might not necessarily understand what Python syntax is. So I'm thinking in places such as our line 7, the dot join, there might not, the empty string dot join and then our sorted word might not necessarily be a familiar concept to those who are not comfortable with Python and strings in general. And so we could just put like a little comment on line 7 that says, okay, this joins our word. This joins our word in our list. So it joins them all together because word is a list and it joins all the words together. And so you just put that here. And also
one thing I do wanted to give you some clarity before you continue is, can you explain to me what production ready means?
Okay, so production ready, in my understanding is basically if you're interacting with a bunch of, if you're interacting, like typically like interaction is done with a bunch of developers, and usually like for a company to like have a code base ready to get shipped out, it has to be such that a bunch of developers have reviewed it and have understood that like the time, like the runtime time and space complexity is all checked out, and that the syntax is like in good order and all that. And typically I'm thinking like in terms of like time complexity, the fact that we're using a dictionary is a really it's helpful because the dictionary reduces our time complexity for a lookup. And so we have like a constant time and a constant space. We're only using it, well, our space is not constant, rather it's linear space because we're using an additional dictionary. And so in terms of time and space constraints are actually good. However, to make it production ready, we would want the code to be able to be interpreted by whoever it is that we are working with. And so the interpretation would be like facilitated better if we had comments that specified what some places, if we had comments that specified what certain things did, because sometimes if a developer who isn't quite comfortable in the language going through the code, they might not be able to catch errors if they don't know what exactly a certain thing is doing. And so things like the methods, like some of the methods that we called, like our method line 7 on the dot get in line 9, the dot append in line 11, we might want to like specify what those actually do. So just in case there's something that's supposed to be going in there that isn't going in, the developer can be able to catch that based off of the comments that are given.
And let me give a little bit more clarity for those that are definitely looking to understand what production ready is. Production is just like Desire said, is that the code base is able to be managed by your peers. Your peers may know how to write Python or they may not, but you got to understand that you're writing code so that it's not just you, but we're working in a collective workspace. One of the best things to do is to write comments, like Desire says, comments at the top in terms of the dictionary to tell me what type of input and output should be there. Comments and lines like line number 7, definitely something that would describe what exactly is happening. And throughout the code, if there's any variables are another way that we have to change so that they are supported in the way that everybody understands what the variable's doing, right? Imagine if I was only using X, Y, and Z, you probably get lost in the whole code base. But there is one pro tip that I want to see if I can get someone in the chat room to tell me. Is there a way that you can append more code, which is the 10th word, to your existing code base so that if anybody in the future makes updates to your code, they are ensured that they will not break what is currently being written? I don't know, give a second or two, Desire, before if you do know the answer. But if anybody, oh, look at that, Leonardo answered, unit test. Now raise your hand if you've ever heard of unit test before, or actually +1 inside of the chat room. +1, right? A few unit tests, a few, all right? So Leonardo got it right. Unit test is one of those skill sets that I want to make sure that you also mention when people ask you what makes code production ready, is that you also have unit tests that will basically validate what a function does. Unit tests is maybe something that you're not taught at school, but it's definitely something we do in the industry. And it actually is a pro tip. If you're in an interview and someone asks you production ready, definitely mention unit tests. Test-driven development is also something, it's called TDD. TDD, test-driven development, is something that when you're designing your code, you actually write your test before you actually write your code. It's almost like the way that lead code does, right? You're writing tests to pass, you're writing code to pass tests. So I want to give Desire a round of applause. Everybody give him a round of applause inside of the chat room. And if you do have your mic open, go ahead and give him a round of applause. He did an extremely well job explaining the concepts, really going in depth. And Desire, this is the thing that I want you to continue to do, is to continue to showcase the skill set, because you are showing your proficiency as an engineer by being able to go as deep as you are in terms of the conversation, and definitely highlighting some things that I didn't even need to ask you, like line number 13. You caught a bug before I even asked you to catch a bug. So really cool job, and thank you so much. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to move on to one of the last things that I want to make sure I mention in terms of the best tips to succeeding in the coding interview. One thing that I want to mention to you all is that, number one, when you're in these coding exercise, I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to feel like you are going to get a question that you don't know. It's all right, but I'm dependent and I'm going to rely on my ability as an engineer to get through this question. The thing that I want you all to know is, like the bug that Desire caught, most of the time we don't even know what the bug is, or we don't even know how to solve it. We need to go research, find the error message. It says line number 13, there's a word that's missing or an object that's not defined, and then going and fix it. That is the normal iteration of being an engineer. And I want that same mindset when you're working on these problems, is that you're iterating through them. You might not know the answer out of the gate, but you work your way through it. One thing that we didn't really get a chance to really have a visual of is the umpire strategy and writing documentation. I know that Anthony D. Mays was talking about writing documentation, but being very intentional about collecting requirements and understanding the problem before you start solving the problem will be my number one tip for you to be able to get through interviewing. All right. So definitely take some of these skill sets, continue to practice them. You can practice them in multiple ways. Obviously, interviewing. If you get an interview from a company, you're not only going to have to showcase, that is practicing and playing like you really are. Mock interviewing, not just with here at CodePath, but with your peers. And even if you have no peers that you can do mock interviews, just mock interview yourself. Talk to yourself and put your mind into that scenario and practice, because practicing is going to make you more proficient when you're actually really in the game. All right. And this is, I believe, the time that we have for questions. So I did let this thing go on for a little bit. It looks like we got about 10 minutes left on the clock, but I'm here for about another 15 minutes or so to answer any question that you may have. I know we have a career peer here, so definitely feel free to mention your questions inside the chat room, and I'll have them come up and ask the question and or ask them which of the many questions that may be there. But if you are brave enough, it looks like Desire's already got his hand up. Come up on stage, ask your questions, and I am here to answer them for you. Let me stop sharing, and so I can get a full screen here. Go ahead, Desire.
I was just gonna ask, because in terms of like, the way the industry is evolving, I've come in contact with, like, just based on your experience, do you when we're preparing for technical interviews, do you like recommend we, like, who are looking for the interesting positions, also like prepare our minds for possible system design questions? Because I've had some of my friends interview with like some companies, and like, for instance, my friend interviewed with Microsoft, and they actually asked them like the steps to design like a traffic light system. And so do you like kind of like just necessarily, how would you recommend us to like also try to prepare for system interview questions in line with our like DSA questions? Or based on your experience, how frequent do you think system interview questions come out for interns?
So I'm going to give you all some resources before I even continue, that I want to make sure that I give you all, if you do run into that. And unfortunately, I am finding that more candidates are being questioned about system design questions, not only about designing, let's say, a elevator for a high-rise building in Manhattan, or hey, tell me how you would design something in terms of managing like big workloads and computer systems and systems in terms of system design. And the thing is that we usually reserve those type of questions for more senior engineers or engineers that have been in the industry for a while. Junior engineers may get them, but I would say level 2 and above is where we would ask those type of questions. Now, those type of questions do require you to have some experience running services or building systems at scale. So I pasted in there 2 resources that I usually recommend students to at least take a look at. You can go down this rabbit hole and you can get lost. So I don't want it to be something that you add into your portfolio of getting ready for a software engineering position, but understanding that system design is potentially a conversation you could have. Now, I prefer not to ask these questions for interns in first years. So I would say I would try to avoid it. But if you do have an interview coming up and the recruiter says you are going to have an interview talking about that topic, I would definitely start to review those resources and be familiarized with it. You can't develop these skills. And this is the tough thing about system design, is the way you develop these skills is actually by doing it. And you all just don't have the experience or have had the opportunity to do it. So that's why I don't like to ask these questions, but at least you have these tools to be available. Just know that we prefer these questions for more senior level 2 engineers that have been in the industry for at least a year or 2. But as you all are continuing your careers, obviously this isn't going to be like, this is day one in terms of you in the industry. 3 or 4 years from now, you definitely still have these resources available if and when you're interviewing for other companies. But I would prefer to say, no, you shouldn't be interviewed for them. But unfortunately, companies are, how can I say, bringing this up. So definitely take those resources and use them to your full potential. All right, Desire, since you're the last one up, I didn't see who raised their hand, but so you get to pick the next person that has their hand raised.
I think it was Deshay who had her hand up next.
All right, Deshay, come onto the stage.
Hey, so I just had a quick question. So what being that communication is important, how would you like, what would be your perspective on a student that comes in and that's like long-winded or that seem like has trouble with a choice of words articulating their solutions? Like, does it negatively affect the candidate, or like how do you see them?
So I think that's almost like a two-part question. So one, for long-winded, remember you're on a time clock, right? You don't have 3 hours to have a conversation about why you would choose hash maps over a set as a data structure. You want to get to the point, catch the keywords, and then move on, and so that you can start to continue to have a conversation. A conversation key is two people talking to each other, not just one person. Right? So just make it straight to the point, and so that you can move on to the conversation, because one thing that I've had happen before inside of an interview is a candidate overspeak, and then we never even really get to write code. And what am I there to evaluate you on? Coding. So you want to make sure you keep it to the objective of what the interview is. If coding is the objective, short, concise questions, and move on in the conversation so you can get to answering the question. Now, if you are long-winded because you're trying to develop your ideas and what you're thinking about, be conscious of that, right? You know yourselves. You've been in scenarios where you've been, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to keep talking until something comes up. Like, you know yourself. If you catch yourself doing that, that's when you pull it back. That's when you're like, all right, I need to be more concise about my thoughts, because the same thing could happen is, as an interviewer, I am listening to everything you're saying, right? And I am listening to when you're throwing stuff on the wall and you're trying things, right? But if you're one of those individuals that just keep trying and throwing stuff on the wall and never make a decision on which one to pursue, that's an evaluation of you, right? So it's like, get to a point where it's like, you're effectively communicating to have a conversation, but you're solving the initial problem, which is writing code or answering a question about a tech. And if you do catch yourself being long-winded, pull that back a little bit, because you'll notice the interviewer just sitting there just waiting. And like, all right, I'm waiting to interject. I'm waiting for my chance, right? That's when you need to go ahead and put that pause button and let the conversation flow. So hopefully that answers your question. We do have at least 2 more people queued up, so you get to choose somebody else. So who would you like to bring up? And then the next person will be from the chat.
Lisa.
All right, Lisa, you're up.
Hi, thank you for hosting the great session today. I was noticing in the video example that Anthony was coding up his implementation like on a separate document and like put his notes in the chat. During like a real interview, is there like a specific platform that a company would like us to use, or is it provided to us for the implementation and documentation?
That's a good question, because one thing that I want you to all be prepared for is interviewing without your IDE. So your IDE is the basic platform that you're basically using to showcase your skill set. And if I'm catching notes, I'm using the IDE to catch the notes. I'm using commenting and saying, hey, at the top of it, be like, comment, input should be this, output should be that, comment, here goes some pseudocode, comment, and just using your IDE in that fashion. But the reason why I bring this up is that there are going to be interviews that they won't let you use your IDE. We will interview in a Google Doc. Same thing. It's like writing code in the Google Doc the same way that I would write it in IDE, is using comments to get those thoughts out. The reason why I want you to use that is there's another side of this interview process that you all may not be familiar with, is after we interview, me as the interviewer, I take what we've done and I have to go make an evaluation. Imagine if I take what you've done and I don't have your comments. I don't have all your thought process. I only have maybe some code, or maybe the code that you submit, but I don't have all that conversation that we have. So that's why you want to make sure you're on that platform, in that doc, or wherever you're going to be writing your code, and dropping notes for the person that has to go make an evaluation on you. Because the tough thing is that, oh, I did this interview with Lisa 2 hours ago. What did Lisa say about this? I remember she said something. Man, I can't remember. You don't want that, right? You want them to have all the resources that they need to make an effective evaluation of you. And I would say make sure it's included with your code, and just writing in comments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you for the help today. I have to head out for my class, but I'll see you next Thursday. Thank you.
Sure, definitely. Thank you so much for coming through. All right, so we got one question here. David said, is system design related to hardware and computer architect? Yes. So well, let me not say yes. I've heard in the industry, they use the word system design in 2 different types of ways. When they're trying to get you to design a more object-oriented programming or object-oriented solution, let's say, hey, design an elevator inside of a building. If I'm designing that, I'm creating a class that's called elevator. There's a method called open door. There's a method called closed door. There's a function that tells me what floor I'm on. So they use system design sometimes to have you have a conversation about object-oriented programming. But the system design that I pasted in there in terms of a conversation that you potentially have talking about tech is talking about designing, let's say, a conversation about an API. All right, when you hit an API, technically you're resolving an IP address. You know what an IP address is? Do you know what kind of infrastructures are behind that? And or let's talk about the database engine in the back end. Have you ever worked on MySQL, Postgres? Have you done any caching stuff with like Redis or Memcache? And ultimately just going down that rabbit hole to understand if you have the competency to design a system to manage a certain level of scale. So that's what that type of system design is referencing. So I do apologize for all the questions that we have. I will basically be answering these in ABBAS, ABBAS, sorry. Go ahead and write your question inside the chat room here, and then I'll make sure I reply back to you directly. But any question that we have in the chat room, I'll definitely be pinging the individuals directly and answering them. I do want to say thank you all so much for coming to this career lab. It is a recorded lab, so we'll be posting it online somewhere afterwards, I believe on YouTube. So definitely you'll be able to check out the recording for more context. And I want to say thank you all so much for pulling up. And I'm hoping that you got some great examples of what it's like to do a coding interview and definitely some new skills to carry along with you. All right. So y'all have a great day. And I look forward to meeting and chatting up with you all. All right.